On the night of March 9th, 1945, at 23:40 hours, Major Thomas Power stood in the control tower at Northfield, Guam, watching the first B-29 Superfortress lumber down the runway. The aircraft carried no defensive ammunition. The gunners sat at empty positions, their turrets stripped of 50 caliber machine guns except for the tail position. In the bomb bay, the aircraft carried 6 tons of M69 incendiary clusters, small finned cylinders filled with napalm gel designed to stick to anything they touched and burn. At 1200 degrees, 334 B-29s would take off that night, all configured the same way. No ammunition, no guns, maximum bomb load. Flying at 5,000 feet instead of the usual 30,000. Everything about the mission violated standard bombing doctrine. Everything about it seemed designed to get the crews killed. But Major Power had run the calculations. He had studied the intelligence reports. He had analyzed the previous test missions. And he believed that this night would change the strategic bombing campaign against Japan completely. What Power didn't know, what nobody in the tower that night could predict, was that in the next 6 hours his bombers would kill more people than had died at Hiroshima. They would destroy 16 square miles of Tokyo. They would create a firestorm so intense it generated its own weather system. And they would prove that a single night of incendiary bombing could accomplish more than months of precision, high-altitude attacks. The mission was called Operation Meeting House. The Japanese would call it the Night of the Black Snow. The B-29 Superfortress had been designed to win the war against Japan through precision daylight bombing from altitudes so high that Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns couldn't reach it. The aircraft first flew in September 1942. Boeing had designed it to carry 10,000 pounds of bombs 6,000 miles at speeds exceeding 350 miles per hour and altitudes above 30,000 feet. It was the most advanced bomber ever built, more complex than any aircraft that had come before it, equipped with pressurized crew compartments, remotely controlled gun turrets, and 4 Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The development program cost $3 billion, more than the Manhattan Project that would build the atomic bombs. 3,000 prototype aircraft were ordered before the first plane ever flew. The United States Army Air Forces needed the B-29 desperately. They needed a bomber that could reach Japan from bases in China or the Mariana Islands. They needed a bomber that could fly higher than Japanese fighters could climb. They needed a bomber that could defend itself with computerized fire control systems and heavy defensive armament. They needed the B-29 to work perfectly. It didn't. The aircraft that arrived in India and China in early 1944 was a maintenance nightmare. The engines caught fire regularly. The magnesium crankcase would ignite from overheating, and once burning, magnesium couldn't be extinguished with conventional fire suppression systems. Pilots reported engine fires on 1 out of every 4 missions. The turbo superchargers failed constantly. The B-29's high-altitude performance depended on turbo superchargers that compressed air to maintain engine power at 30,000 feet. When the turbo superchargers failed, the engines lost power and the aircraft couldn't maintain altitude. Crews found themselves descending into the range of Japanese fighters with no way to climb back to safety. The remotely controlled gun turrets malfunctioned. The system used analog computers to calculate lead angles and automatically aim the turrets when gunners tracked targets. In theory, it was revolutionary. In practice, the computers failed, the hydraulic systems leaked, and the turrets jammed. Gunners sat helplessly watching Japanese fighters attack while their guns pointed uselessly in the wrong direction. The fuel transfer system was unreliable. The B-29 carried fuel in multiple tanks throughout the wings and fuselage. A complex system of pumps transferred fuel to maintain proper weight distribution and feed the engines. When the transfer pumps failed, engines ran out of fuel while thousands of gallons remained trapped in inaccessible tanks. Boeing sent technical representatives to every base where B-29s operated. These civilian engineers worked alongside military mechanics, troubleshooting problems, modifying systems, writing field modification orders that changed production aircraft before they left the factory. The modifications helped, but they couldn't solve the fundamental problem. The B-29 had been rushed into production before testing was complete. It was too complex, too advanced, too ambitious. Every system pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible in 1944, and every system had failure modes that hadn't been anticipated during design. The first combat missions from China targeted Japanese-held steel mills in Manchuria and Thailand. The results were disappointing. Aircraft aborted due to mechanical failures. Bombs missed their targets due to cloud cover and navigation errors. The few bombs that hit their targets caused minimal damage. The B-29 had been designed for precision bombing, but precision required clear weather, accurate navigation, and properly functioning bomb sites. Combat conditions rarely provided any of those things. By September 1944, the B-29 campaign from China was quickly failing. The aircraft couldn't reach most of Japan from Chinese bases. The supply line from India over the Himalayas, the route pilots called flying the hump, couldn't deliver enough fuel and bombs to sustain intensive operations. Each combat mission required 6 supply missions to deliver the necessary fuel. The Japanese were advancing on the Chinese airfields, forcing bases to be abandoned. The entire strategic concept was unraveling. The capture of the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in summer 1944 changed everything. The Marianas were 1,500 miles from Tokyo, well within the B-29's combat radius. The islands had space for massive air bases. Supply lines ran directly from the United States by ship, eliminating the logistical nightmare of the China-Burma-India theater. Construction battalions began building airfields immediately. By November 1944, the first B-29s arrived in the Marianas. Brigadier General Haywood Hansell commanded the 21st Bomber Command from Saipan. Hansell was a precision bombing advocate. He had helped write the Air Corps Tactical School doctrine that emphasized daylight precision attacks on specific industrial targets. He believed that destroying Japan's war production capacity would force surrender without invading the home islands. He believed the B-29 was the weapon that would prove his theory correct. Hansell's first mission against Tokyo launched on November 24, 1944. 111 B-29s took off, 24 aborted due to mechanical problems. The remaining 87 attacked the Musashino aircraft engine plant in western Tokyo from altitudes between 27,000 and 32,000 feet. The bombardiers couldn't see the target. Clouds covered Tokyo. The bombs fell blindly. Post-strike reconnaissance showed that fewer than 10 bombs hit anywhere near the factory. The mission was a failure. Hansell tried again and again. Throughout December 1944 and January 1945, the 21st Bomber Command launched mission after mission against Japanese industrial targets. The results were consistently poor. Cloud cover obscured targets. The jet stream at 30,000 feet over Japan reached wind speeds of 200 miles per hour, blowing aircraft off course and making accurate bombing impossible. Japanese fighters, particularly the new Kawasaki Ki-45 and Nakajima Ki-84, could reach 30,000 feet and press attacks despite the B-29's defensive firepower. The losses were mounting, not from combat primarily, but from mechanical failures and operational accidents. B-29s ditched in the ocean when engines failed on the long overwater flight. They crashed on takeoff when overloaded with fuel and bombs. They burned on the ground when engine fires couldn't be extinguished. The crews were exhausted, flying 8-hour missions in unpressurized discomfort at below zero temperatures, watching their bombs miss targets repeatedly, wondering what they were accomplishing. In Washington, General Henry Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, was losing patience. He had invested $3 billion in the B-29 program. He had promised the Joint Chiefs of Staff that strategic bombing would force Japan to surrender. He had staked his reputation and the independence of the Air Forces on the B-29's success, and the B-29 campaign was failing. Arnold needed results. He needed them quickly, and he decided that Hansel wasn't the man to deliver them. On January 6, 1945, Arnold sent a message to Saipan. Major General Curtis LeMay would replace Hansel as commander of the 21st Bomber Command. LeMay had commanded the 3rd Bomb Division in Europe. He had developed the combat box formation that reduced bomber losses over Germany. He had led the first American bombing raid on Regensburg, flying straight into the target through devastating fighter attacks, then continuing to North Africa instead of returning to England. He had a reputation for getting results, regardless of cost. LeMay arrived at Guam on January 20th. He spent 2 weeks observing operations, studying mission reports, talking to crews. What he saw disturbed him. The precision bombing doctrine wasn't working. The weather over Japan made visual bombing impossible most of the time. The jet stream disrupted formations and ruined bombing accuracy even on clear days. The high-altitude attacks weren't destroying targets. The effort and resources invested in each mission weren't producing proportional results. LeMay had seen something different in Europe. He had watched Royal Air Force bombers attacking German cities at night with incendiary bombs. The British had abandoned precision bombing in 1941 after concluding that their bombers couldn't hit specific factories in daylight or darkness. Instead, they adopted area bombing, attacking entire cities with high explosives and incendiaries designed to start massive fires. The tactic was controversial, but it worked. Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, all burned. LeMay wondered if the same approach might work against Japanese cities. The construction was different. German cities had stone and concrete buildings that resisted fire. Japanese cities were built primarily of wood and paper. Houses had tile roofs, but wooden frames and paper walls. Factories were wooden structures. Even larger buildings used extensive wood construction. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, all the major industrial cities were fundamentally flammable. The air forces had studied incendiary attacks against Japan before. In 1943, the Chemical Warfare Service had built replicas of Japanese houses at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. They built entire neighborhoods, copying Tokyo residential districts exactly, using the same construction techniques, the same materials, the same dimensions. Then they burned them. Systematically, repeatedly, testing different incendiary mixtures, different bomb loadings, different attack patterns. The test program determined that napalm-filled M69 incendiary clusters were the most effective weapon for starting fires in Japanese cities. The M69 cluster was a simple weapon. The cluster container held 47 individual incendiary bomblets. Each bomblet was a hexagonal steel tube 19 inches long and 3 inches in diameter, filled with napalm gel, an aluminum salt of naphthenic and palmitic acids mixed with gasoline. When the cluster opened at 5,000 feet, the individual bomblets fell, stabilized by tail fins. On impact, a white phosphorus igniter lit the napalm. The napalm burned at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ignite wood instantly. The gel stuck to whatever it touched. Water couldn't extinguish it. The only way to stop it burning was to smother it or let it burn out. Each bomblet burned for several minutes, starting multiple fires as the gel splattered on impact. LeMay had all this information. He knew that incendiary attacks might work, but his orders from Arnold specified precision attacks on aircraft factories, engine plants, and munitions works. Area attacks on cities weren't authorized. That was terror bombing, the tactic the Germans had used against London and Rotterdam. American doctrine opposed it. American strategic bombing theory emphasized destroying industrial capacity, not killing civilians. But LeMay was watching his crews die on missions that accomplished nothing. He was watching B-29s burn on the runway from engine fires. He was watching formation after formation return from Japan with reconnaissance photos showing their bombs had missed the target by miles. The precision bombing campaign was failing, and LeMay wasn't going to keep sending crews on useless missions because doctrine said that was the right approach. LeMay made his decision in February. He would test incendiary attacks, not openly, not as a change in strategy, but as a tactical experiment to determine if fire was more effective than high explosives against Japanese industrial targets. On February 23rd, he sent 174 B-29s to Tokyo, carrying a mixture of high explosives and incendiaries. The target was designated as industrial areas in northern Tokyo, but effectively, it was area bombing. The results surprised everyone. The B-29s attacked from altitudes between 24,000 and 27,000 feet. They dropped their bombs through cloud cover using radar. They couldn't see the target, couldn't aim at specific factories, just dropped blindly over the estimated location of industrial districts. The bombs started fires throughout northern Tokyo. Over 1 square mile burned before Japanese firefighters brought the fires under control. Post-strike reconnaissance showed significant damage to residential areas and some industrial facilities. LeMay studied the reconnaissance photos. The fire had worked. It had worked better than months of precision attacks. The flames hadn't discriminated between factories and houses. They had burned everything in their path, but they had destroyed industrial capacity, small workshops where workers assembled aircraft components, storage warehouses holding raw materials, transportation infrastructure connecting factories to suppliers, all burned. Japanese war production wasn't concentrated in large American-style factories. It was distributed through hundreds of small workshops in residential neighborhoods. A precision attack could destroy one large factory, but that factory relied on dozens of small suppliers who machined parts in workshops attached to their homes. Destroying the large factory didn't stop production if the suppliers continued operating, but burning the entire neighborhood destroyed both the factory and its supply chain. LeMay ran more test missions. On February 25th, 172 B-29s attacked Tokyo again with incendiaries, burning another square mile. On March 4th, 159 B-29s hit Shizuoka, burning 2 square miles. Each mission convinced LeMay that incendiary area attacks were more effective than precision bombing at destroying Japan's dispersed industrial capacity. But LeMay also recognized that the high-altitude attacks weren't fully exploiting the incendiary potential. Dropping bombs from 25,000 feet through clouds meant wide dispersion. The bombs scattered over large areas, starting scattered fires that Japanese firefighters could contain. To create truly devastating fires that would overwhelm firefighting capacity and burn entire districts, the bombs needed to be concentrated in a smaller area. And to concentrate the bombs, the B-29s needed to bomb from lower altitude where accuracy improved. Lower altitude meant greater risk. Japanese anti-aircraft guns were most effective below 10,000 feet. Japanese fighters could intercept more easily at lower altitudes. But LeMay had noticed something in the mission reports. Japanese air defenses were concentrated at high altitude. The fighters climbed to 30,000 feet to intercept B-29 formations. The anti-aircraft guns were fused for high-altitude bursts. Nobody expected American bombers to attack at 5,000 feet. The Japanese defenses weren't positioned for it. LeMay developed a plan that seemed insane. Strip the defensive armament from the B-29s to save weight. Remove all the guns except the tail position. Use the weight saved to carry more bombs. Fly at night to reduce the risk of fighter interception. Attack from 5,000 feet for maximum accuracy. Saturate a concentrated area with incendiaries to overwhelm firefighting capacity and create a firestorm. A firestorm was a theoretical phenomenon that Air Force's planners had studied. When fires burned intensely over a concentrated area, they heated the air above them. The hot air rose rapidly, creating a low-pressure zone at ground level. Surrounding cooler air rushed toward the low pressure, creating winds that fed the fire with fresh oxygen. The winds grew stronger as the fires intensified, creating a self-sustaining cycle. In a true firestorm, winds reached hurricane force, temperatures at ground level exceeded 1,000 degrees, and everything combustible burned. The Royal Air Force had created firestorms at Hamburg and Dresden. The Hamburg firestorm in July 1943 killed 42,000 people in a single night. The Dresden firestorm in February 1945 killed 25,000. LeMay believed that Tokyo's wooden construction made it even more vulnerable to firestorm than German cities. If he could concentrate enough incendiaries in a small area quickly enough, the fires would merge into a firestorm that would burn until nothing remained. The plan violated every principle of strategic bombing doctrine. It abandoned precision for area effects. It deliberately targeted residential districts where workers lived. It accepted that thousands of civilians would die. It risked sending undefended bombers into areas where a single fighter could kill them easily. LeMay's staff officers opposed it. They argued it was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much of a departure from established doctrine. LeMay overruled them. He told his operations staff to plan a maximum effort incendiary attack on Tokyo for the first night in March when weather conditions were favorable. The target would be the Shitamachi district, the low-lying area of eastern Tokyo, where population density exceeded 100,000 people per square mile. The area contained residential neighborhoods, small factories, warehouses, and commercial districts, all built of wood. The operations staff selected the specific target area, approximately 12 square miles bounded by the Sumida River to the west and Tokyo Bay to the east. The attack plan called for 3 waves. The first wave, Pathfinder aircraft, would mark the target with incendiaries to create aiming points for following bombers. The second wave, the main force, would saturate the marked area with incendiaries. The third wave would strike any remaining unburned sections. LeMay briefed his wing commanders on March 8th. He explained the mission plan, the rationale, and the risks. He told them that he was stripping the guns from their aircraft. He told them they would fly at 5,000 feet. He told them they expected minimal fighter opposition because the Japanese wouldn't anticipate low-altitude night attacks. He also told them that he expected 25 to 30% losses. 1 out of every 4 aircraft might not return. The wing commanders protested. Sending undefended bombers at 5,000 feet into enemy territory at night seemed suicidal. LeMay listened to their objections, then said the decision was made. The mission would proceed as planned. If it failed, he would take responsibility. If it succeeded, it would change the war. The crews were briefed on the afternoon of March 9th. When the briefing officers announced that the aircraft would carry no ammunition and would attack at 5,000 feet, the reaction was shock. Pilots and navigators shouted questions. Gunners demanded to know why they were being sent on missions without weapons. The briefing officers explained that weight saved on ammunition allowed each aircraft to carry 12,000 pounds of incendiaries instead of the usual bomb load. They explained that night attacks at low altitude would minimize fighter interception risk. They explained that this mission could accomplish more than weeks of high-altitude precision attacks. The crews weren't convinced. They thought LeMay had lost his mind. They thought the mission was a death sentence. They went to their aircraft, expecting many of them wouldn't return. Some wrote letters to families and left them with chaplains. Some made arrangements for personal effects to be sent home. They believed they were flying into a trap. At 2200 hours, the Pathfinder aircraft began taking off from Saipan. They would fly ahead of the main force, arrive over Tokyo first, and mark the target. The first Pathfinder was commanded by Captain James Shearer. His aircraft carried 180 M47 napalm bombs, larger incendiaries, designed to start intense fires visible from altitude. Shearer's crew was experienced. They had flown together since training in the United States. They trusted each other, but they had never flown a combat mission stripped of defensive guns. The flight to Japan took 6 hours. Shearer climbed to 7,000 feet, then descended as he approached the Japanese coast. His radar operator picked up the coastline 100 miles out. The night was clear. Visibility unlimited. Shearer could see Tokyo ahead. The city lights dim under wartime blackout restrictions, but still visible as a glow against the dark landscape. Japanese fighters had been active earlier in the evening. Several crews reported being tracked by searchlights. But as Shearer approached Tokyo, the night was quiet. At 23:55, Shearer's bombardier, Lieutenant Dale Eby, opened the bomb bay doors. The target area appeared ahead, the Shitamachi district, stretching along the Sumida River. Eby had memorized the landmarks, the river bends, the rail lines, the specific blocks that marked the center of the target zone. He waited until the first reference point passed under the nose, then counted seconds, watching the second checkpoint approach. At precisely 0008 on March 10th, Eby released the M47 bombs. The bombs fell away in a long string, tumbling, stabilizing, igniting as they hit. Shearer banked hard left and climbed, watching behind. The bombs burst into flame across a 2-block area, starting fires in wooden buildings that caught instantly. Within seconds, flames rose 100 feet high. Other Pathfinder aircraft followed Shearer, dropping their incendiaries in a pattern that created a giant flaming X marking the center of the target zone. The main force arrived 15 minutes later. 325 B-29s, each loaded with 6 to 8 tons of Man-69 incendiary clusters. They came in a stream, one aircraft every 30 seconds, flying at 5,000 feet. The lead bombardier aimed at the Pathfinder fires. The following bombardiers aimed at the fires started by previous aircraft. The pattern concentrated the incendiaries in an area roughly 2 miles by 3 miles. The M69 clusters opened at altitude, releasing 47 bomblets from each cluster. Thousands of individual incendiaries fell across the target area, starting thousands of separate fires. The fires grew, merged, spread. Within 20 minutes, the entire target area was burning. Within 40 minutes, a firestorm developed. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Captain Robert Fitzgerald commanded a B-29 in the second wave. He arrived over Tokyo 30 minutes after the Pathfinder attack. From 40 miles away, he could see the glow. As he approached the city, he saw that the entire eastern section was burning. Flames rose thousands of feet into the air. Smoke obscured everything below. The heat was so intense that his aircraft, flying at 5,000 feet, encountered severe turbulence from the rising hot air. Fitzgerald's bombardier couldn't identify specific aiming points through the smoke. He just aimed at the center of the fire and released. The incendiaries fell into flames that were already burning at maximum intensity. It seemed redundant, bombing fires that were already out of control. But the mission plan called for saturation, for overwhelming the target with more fire than could possibly be contained. Fitzgerald turned west, away from the city, and began the long flight back to Saipan. Looking back, he saw Tokyo burning like nothing he had seen in 2 years of combat. The flames were visible for 150 miles. On the ground, the Shitamachi district had become hell. The fires started simultaneously across hundreds of city blocks. Japanese firefighters responded immediately, but they were overwhelmed within minutes. The fires were spreading faster than crews could reach them. Buildings ignited before firefighters arrived. Water pressure dropped as multiple fires demanded water simultaneously. Fire stations burned, trapping equipment and crews. The firestorm developed around 1:30 in the morning. Winds reached 70 miles per hour, feeding the flames with hurricane-force gusts. The heat became unbearable. People fled their homes, running from fires that chased them through the streets. Canals that normally provided refuge boiled. People who jumped into the water to escape the heat died from scalding. Those who stayed on land died from heat, smoke, or fire. There was no safe place. The firestorm generated its own weather. The rising hot air created a vacuum at ground level that sucked in surrounding air with tremendous force. The winds knocked people down, pulled them toward the flames. Debris flew through the air, wooden beams, roof tiles, burning paper, all carried by winds that grew stronger as the fire intensified. The temperature at street level exceeded 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. In the center of the firestorm, human bodies ignited spontaneously. Metal melted, The B-29s continued bombing until 0330, wave after wave, 334 aircraft total, each dropping 6 to 8 tons of incendiaries. 14 B-29s were lost, most to mechanical failures or operational accidents rather than enemy action. Japanese fighters made some interception attempts, but the night attacks at low altitude confused their standard tactics. Anti-aircraft fire was sporadic and ineffective. By dawn, on March 10th, the fires were still burning. 16 square miles of Tokyo had burned completely. Everything combustible was gone. Only concrete foundations and steel frames remained. The wooden buildings, the houses, the shops, the workshops, the warehouses, all reduced to ash. The death toll was estimated at 80,000 to 100,000 people, though exact numbers were never determined. More people died in that single night than would die at Hiroshima 5 months later. Major Power stood in the control tower at Northfield, watching the B-29s return. He counted them as they landed. 320 aircraft returned, 14 were missing. Loss rate, 4.2%, far below the 25 to 30% that LeMay had predicted. The mission was a success by every metric. More bombs dropped, more area destroyed, more damage inflicted, and fewer losses than any previous mission. LeMay received the first damage assessment reports at 0800 hours. The reconnaissance photos showed devastation beyond what anyone had anticipated. The entire target area was gone, not damaged, gone, obliterated. The photos showed vast grey fields where neighborhoods had existed 12 hours earlier. The Sumida River was visible as a dark line through the grey ash. Nothing else remained. LeMay ordered immediate planning for follow-up missions. If one night of incendiary bombing could destroy 16 square miles of Tokyo, then repeated attacks could eliminate Japan's industrial capacity entirely. The target list expanded to include Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and every other major city. The strategy shifted from precision attacks on specific factories to area attacks on entire urban industrial districts. The March 9th attack changed the strategic bombing campaign completely. Over the next 5 months, B-29s burned 66 Japanese cities. They dropped 167,000 tons of incendiary bombs. They destroyed approximately 40% of the urban area of every major city except Kyoto, which was spared due to its cultural significance. The destruction was systematic, methodical, overwhelming. Tokyo was attacked again on May 25th. The B-29s burned another 20 square miles. Nagoya was attacked on March 11th, March 13th, and repeatedly through June, eventually burning 87 square miles. Osaka was attacked on March 13th, burning 8 square miles in one night. Kobe burned on March 16, then again in May and June. By August, Kobe had lost half its urban area. The smaller cities came next: Kawasaki, Yokohama, Toyama, Numazu, Fukuoka. Dozens of industrial centers systematically burned. The pattern was always the same. Pathfinders marked the target, main force saturated with incendiaries, fires merged into firestorms, cities burned. Japanese civil defense was powerless to stop it. Firefighting equipment was inadequate for the scale of attacks. Water supplies were insufficient. Fire breaks, wide streets cleared of buildings to prevent fire spread, were overwhelmed when fires jumped the gaps. The only effective defense was evacuation, moving the population out of cities before the attacks came. But evacuating millions of people from industrial centers meant shutting down war production, which accomplished the American objective anyway. Japanese fighter defenses adapted slowly. They positioned fighters at lower altitudes, attempted more night interceptions, developed tactics for engaging the B-29 streams, but they lacked the aircraft, fuel, and trained pilots to seriously threaten the raids. By mid-1945, the Japanese fighter force was conserving resources for the expected American invasion. They weren't going to waste scarce fuel and pilots defending cities that were already burning. The moral questions about incendiary attacks were debated then and remain controversial today. LeMay never apologized for the tactic. He stated publicly after the war that if America had lost, he would have been tried as a war criminal for what he ordered. He also stated that the incendiary campaign shortened the war, saved American lives that would have been lost in an invasion, and ultimately saved Japanese lives because the war ended sooner. The crews who flew the missions had mixed feelings. Some believed they were doing what was necessary to end the war quickly. Others were disturbed by the scale of destruction and civilian casualties. Most focused on survival, on completing their missions and going home, and tried not to think too hard about what they were doing. The strategic effectiveness is undeniable. By August 1945, Japan's war production had collapsed. The distribution system connecting factories to suppliers was destroyed, transportation networks were severed, the labor force was evacuated or dead, raw materials couldn't reach factories, finished products couldn't reach military forces, the economy was shutting down. The atomic bombs, dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, received massive attention and are often credited with ending the war. But Japan was already defeated by conventional bombing before the atomic weapons were used. The incendiary campaign had destroyed Japan's ability to continue fighting. The atomic bombs provided a face-saving excuse for surrender, a way for Japanese leaders to claim they were surrendering to a revolutionary new weapon rather than admitting they had been defeated by sustained strategic bombing. LeMay understood this. He later stated that the atomic bombs were militarily unnecessary because the incendiary campaign had already won. He believed Japan would have surrendered by November 1945. Regardless, once the reality of complete industrial collapse became undeniable, the atomic bombs accelerated the surrender by a few months, but didn't fundamentally change the outcome. The B-29 Superfortress had been designed as a precision weapon, a technological marvel that would validate American strategic bombing doctrine through accurate attacks on specific industrial targets. Instead, it became the most destructive conventional weapon of World War II through brute force area attacks that abandoned precision for overwhelming violence. The transformation happened because one commander, Curtis LeMay, recognized that doctrine wasn't producing results and had the confidence to try something different. The night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, was the deadliest air raid in human history. More people died in Tokyo that night than died in any other bombing attack in any war. The firestorm was so intense that bomber crews smelled burning flesh at 5,000 feet. The smoke plume was visible from 150 miles away. The flames consumed everything in a 12-square-mile area within 6 hours. Major Thomas Power, who watched the first B-29 take off that night, flew on the mission himself. He was the air commander, flying in the lead aircraft, directing the attack from overhead. He watched the fires develop, watched the firestorm take hold, watched Tokyo burn. Years later, he said that he had never seen anything like it, before or since. The destruction was total, absolute, complete. When dawn came, and he could see clearly, there was nothing left. Just grey ash, where a city had existed. The crews who flew that night never forgot it. The turbulence from the heat made flying difficult. Several aircraft were flipped inverted by the violent updrafts. Pilots fought for control, used full power to climb away from the firestorm. Some aircraft were coated with ash and residue from the smoke. The smell penetrated the pressurized cabins, a sweet, sickly odor that crews couldn't identify, but that they later realized was burning human flesh. When the mission was over and damage assessment was complete, LeMay sent a message to Washington. He reported that 1/4 of Tokyo had been destroyed in a single attack. He requested authorization to continue incendiary operations against all major Japanese cities. General Arnold approved immediately. The results spoke for themselves. The March 9th attack proved that one well-planned incendiary mission could accomplish more than months of precision bombing. It proved that low-altitude attacks at night were survivable with acceptable losses. It proved that Japanese cities were extraordinarily vulnerable to fire. And it proved that the B-29, despite all its technical problems and operational challenges, could be the decisive weapon in the Pacific War. The B-29 Superfortress flew its last combat mission on August 14, 1945, over 800 aircraft, attacked targets across Japan in a final demonstration of American air power. The next day, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. In total, B-29s dropped 170,000 tons of bombs on Japan. 147,000 tons were incendiaries. The precision bombing campaign, the strategy the aircraft had been designed to execute, accounted for only 23,000 tons. The incendiary attacks destroyed 178 square miles of urban area across 66 cities. They killed approximately 350,000 to 500,000 people. Though exact casualties were never determined, they rendered millions homeless. They destroyed approximately 30 to 40% of Japan's industrial production capacity. The human cost was enormous. The strategic effectiveness was undeniable. Whether the ends justified the means remains debated. What isn't debated is that the campaign changed aerial warfare permanently. Strategic bombing after World War II focused on destroying entire target systems through sustained attacks rather than on precision strikes against individual facilities. The incendiary campaign against Japan established that overwhelming force could achieve strategic objectives when precision couldn't. Curtis LeMay remained in the Air Force after the war. He commanded Strategic Air Command during the Cold War, built the American Nuclear Bomber Force, and eventually became Air Force Chief of Staff. He never expressed regret for the incendiary campaign. He believed he had done what was necessary to end the war with minimum American casualties. Whether he was right remains a question every generation must answer for itself. The B-29 Superfortress was retired from combat operations in 1960. By then, jet bombers had replaced propeller-driven aircraft, but the B-29's legacy lasted decades. The strategic bombing concepts developed during the incendiary campaign influenced American military doctrine through Vietnam and beyond. The willingness to use overwhelming force to achieve strategic objectives, to accept massive destruction as the price of victory, to prioritize results over methods, all trace back to decisions made in March 1945. Thank you, Tai, for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.